All right, well, why don't we get started so we can hear from our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today for our special Behind the Idea webinar for World IP Day. We have a great panel in store for you today. Our moderator, Louis, who is an inventor and entrepreneur himself, will lead us through a discussion with three very different perspectives of bringing an idea to market. I encourage everyone to enter questions in the chat box, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can. I did want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Inventus, for sponsoring this webinar. As you may know, IPO Education Foundation is a nonprofit organization, and so we rely on our donors and our sponsors to be able to bring you programs like this. So thank you so much, Inventus, for supporting this webinar. Please make sure that you look at our future webinars on our website, ipoef.org/behindtheidea. Our next webinar will be May 13th in celebration of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We have some very intriguing STEM professionals, one of which was a key part of the Mars mission in 2020. So make sure that you check that out on our website. Also, we have our social media accounts here. Please make sure to follow us. This is where you will get the most up-to-date information about our programs as well as our webinars. So with that, let's get to the interesting stuff. Louis, I pass it off to you.
Whoops, I broke the rule. I forgot to unmute myself. So thank you, Kristen. It's wonderful to not only sponsor this event, but also be the moderator, because we've got a wonderful panel. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself, because I want to really hear from them. But my background, I'm a serial inventor and entrepreneur. And I started my first business while I was in college. I attended the University of Illinois. I played lacrosse. There wasn't a local supplier of equipment. And I thought, I learned in Econ 101 about supply and demand. When there's demand for a product or a service, and when the market doesn't satisfy that demand, there's a business opportunity. So rather than just take notes, I figured, why not take action and start a company? And so over the past 30 plus years, I've been involved in developing thousands of consumer products and medical devices. I have a company called Inventus Partners, which for the past 20 years has developed over 2,200 products. And we've also helped businesses raise over $350 million in capital to get their businesses off the ground and get their products onto store shelves. But in addition to running a business, I have a very strong interest in both education as well as giving back. And so I teach entrepreneurship and intellectual property at 4 universities. I'm also currently on the SBA, SBDC National Board of Advisors. I served 7 years on the Patent Public Advisory Committee. And then I serve on a variety of different public and private and government boards. But finally, I'm also the publisher of Inventor's Digest magazine. It's a publication that's been around for 35 years. If you haven't read Inventor's Digest, it's free. Just go to inventorsdigest.com. And there's wonderful interviews, including Dr. Gary Michelson, who's been on our cover a few times, that not only tell the great stories of inventors, but the successes and sometimes the failures, and their great learning experiences. And so that's my background. But what we are really here this evening for is to learn about our inventors and learn about their experience with developing products, filing patents, and monetizing their ideas. And so we are very fortunate this evening to have 3 successful inventors: Sue Carr, president and founder of CarTech LLC. We've got Dr. Gary Michelson, a surgeon, inventor, and founder of Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property. And finally, Grant Schreimer, the director of Connect and Develop at Procter & Gamble. So why don't we start with you, Sue? If you can give us a brief background, and then we'll go to Grant next. And you're on mute.
My bad. So I'm Sue, and president and founder of CarTech LLC. It's a medical device company. And while I was attending pharmacy school, I worked in a local hospital as a pharmacy technician. One of my primary responsibilities was to batch large IV bags using a lot of medications packaged in glass ampules. I immediately noticed how unsafe and time consuming the process was. And the sad truth is, it still is. After I graduated pharmacy school, the money was in retail. So I worked for the mogul CVS pharmacy as a pharmacy manager for a very long time. But my passion was always in hospital pharmacy. So I returned to hospital pharmacy, and I specialized as a clinical hospital decentralized pharmacist in ICU, ER, oncology, and NICU. And we worked side by side next to the doctors, and we responded to codes. And I continued to see my colleagues struggle with the filtering process, which prompted me to find a better way. I wanted to simplify the process because a wise man told me, make it simple. So I came up with an all-in-one package, one needle filter device that I think is safer, quicker, easier, cheaper, and greener, right? That's what you always want to hear. I bootstrapped my way through 2 patents and a prototype, and I realized that my first patent they couldn't build, and so I had to go back to the drawing board, and I finally got a working prototype, and my second patent supported the prototype. I did things backwards because I had no idea what I was doing, and I realized that I had to learn the whole business lean model canvas. So I started applying to accelerators and incubators and I-Corp programs, and luckily TEDCO and FITSE allowed me to enter into their programs, and I learned a lot. And they've supported me both financially and with mentoring. I never would be where I am today had it not been for their support and the support of the whole biohealth capital region. TEDCO and FITSE are government-run agencies that support the biohealth community. They've been very, very good to me and to Cartech, and they continue to support me. I've applied for grants, and this is just pitch deck competitions, and we're now closing our first round with a lead investor and a seed round with a lead angel investor, and I'm still waiting to hear back on a couple of grants I've applied for. We met with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, with the pre-submission because you need what's called a 510K class 2 approval for a medical device, and it takes about 3 to 6 months for them to approve it, but you want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. So we have a clear path forward, and we've contracted a company down in the Research Triangle area to help us prepare for FDA. We're currently 4 months into production, and we anticipate market penetration mid-2022. It's been a really long journey, and in the past just 2 years, I can't tell you how much I learned. I feel like I deserve an MBA, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I doubt I'll ever be a pharmacist again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. That's a great story. Our next panelist is Grant Schreimer from Procter & Gamble. Grant, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as both an inventor and someone who evaluates inventions?
Absolutely. Thanks, Louis. So I work at Procter & Gamble, and I'm a director in corporate functions R&D. And a little bit about my background. I got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in coatings and polymeric materials from North Dakota State University. But I guess my passion for this area of IP goes back to when I was really, really young. And as far back as I can remember, I was picking up books from the library about magnetism and electricity while all my friends and even my siblings were getting books about Curious George. So I've always been interested in that area, and that continued on with working with my uncle, who is an IBM engineer, and we built rockets and robots together. And I guess all of this is firmly rooted in my curiosity of really how the world works, and that continued on through college and into my career at P&G, where I joined in 2007 and worked on a lot of really interesting things in R&D, and lately it's led to my passion for sensors, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. Worked on a lot of really great products. I have over 20 patents, and I'm also an inventor and entrepreneur. So this is kind of in line with my current role at P&G, where I lead Connect and Develop in an area of focus on artificial intelligence and sensors and IoT. I'm married. In my spare time with my wife, we're entrepreneurs. There's no conflict of interest with P&G. It's areas outside of what we work on, but really we're trying to create things to change the world. And one of those is this patent that we worked on together, and we're kind of moving a startup forward called Backseat Buddy. It's a connected device to remind parents that they're traveling with their child. But in P&G, I've some products that I helped bring to market with an R&D team. So I helped create some of the early prototypes for Lumi. This is the connected nursery that is associated with Pampers. Opte is this precision skin cosmetic device. And when I was the global Swiffer packaging R&D leader, I led a few products to market. One I was really proud of was the Swiffer Super Extended Duster. It's a 6-foot duster. So really excited to be here and talk about my experience with IP from the perspective of industry, but I also engage with a lot of startups and academia in my role in Connect and Develop. So really excited about today's conversation.
Great, thank you, Grant. And finally, Dr. Gary Michelson. I have known Gary for many years, and his story is remarkable. So I'll let him share his journey as a doctor, as an inventor, and as a major philanthropist.
Thank you, Louis. But before I do that, I need to tell the audience that in my 40 years of involvement with the intellectual property system, I've never encountered anybody who is more knowledgeable than Louis about how to monetize an invention. So after this, call him. This is a guy, 40 years on panels, this is the guy. Okay, I just wanted to very quickly hit on a couple things that Sue and Grant said, because these are the key words. Sue talked about being passionate, and Grant used the exact same word, being passionate. It's important to do what makes your heart sing. And even though what Sue does may seem esoteric to everybody else, it's right in her sweet spot. And so there's some lessons here. And then the other thing was when Grant started talking about why he's passionate about the things he cares about. You will find a woman today, middle-aged woman, who's actually an electrochemical engineer. Well, there were no electrochemical engineer girls 30 and 40 years ago. And it'll turn out her father was an electrochemical engineer, or somebody who was interested in aerospace. These are the things that send us down these different paths. They are frequently things that we were passionate about as children, and we're doing it on a larger scale as adults. So my story. After 24 years of going to school, I was in the last year of my orthopedic residency, and I said, I'm going to be a spine surgeon. The professors who were training me, to the last person, said to me, "What are you, an idiot?" Because in those days, you would do the surgeries exactly the way you were supposed to. And sometimes the patients would get better, and sometimes they wouldn't, and sometimes they would get worse. So they all looked at me, they're going, "Aren't you bright enough to go into something else? Why would you do that?" And it was the best decision of my life, because had I gone into something where everything had already been perfected, there would have been no drive to invent. So I went into an area that was actually ripe for innovation. Things were going so poorly that everything was an improvement. And it's interesting because George Bernard Shaw said that inventors as a group are a disgruntled lot. And he went on to say that, most people can accept the world exactly the way it is and contort themselves to fit the world. But inventors are different. They want to change the world to conform to themselves. So when you see something, and both Sue and Grant mentioned this, when you see something that you don't like, that's the motivation to go out and fix it. So that's my story. Louis, if you want to know anything else, ask me.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Michelson, and thank you, Sue and Grant as well. We've got just a great panel here, and we've got a number of questions already queued up. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the questions from the audience as well. But why don't we start off with kind of an easy question that everyone wants to know, and that is, what are the obstacles that each of you have faced when you had that great idea, that moment of inspiration, and getting the idea to the point where you could actually monetize or commercialize that? What were some of the obstacles you faced? And so, Grant, as an inventor, what was the big obstacle that you and your wife, faced that challenged your ability to get that product to market?
I'll answer that one, but I also have some interesting insights from P&G standpoint as well. But I guess one of the big obstacles on our end was neither of us were attorneys. Now, I had a lot of experience dealing with IP at Procter & Gamble, but it was more from kind of conceptualizing the claims and really working closely with an attorney and focusing a lot on the invention. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you have to either file it on your own or work with an attorney. So that's definitely one obstacle. Another is, I think Sue hit on this a little bit, it's getting a little ahead of yourself in the invention and ensuring that you've done your due diligence and looking at the landscape of IP and has it already been invented. So a little bit of barriers in terms of effectively going through and figuring out what's patented out there and is your invention patentable. I would say those were probably some of the biggest barriers we experienced on our entrepreneur end. On the business side of P&G, it's very similar, where it's some of the barriers are, what is, we'll call it white space. White space is areas that haven't been invented in yet, for lack of a better term. And a lot of those are some of the early barriers. And then, once you've patented it, will you make money on the invention? Is there a business model associated with it? So that's kind of a high level overview of kind of the contradiction, I guess, between being an entrepreneur and working for a large corporation.
Great. Thank you, Grant. And Dr. Michelson, I know your story. You haven't shared all of it with our audience yet, but obviously there were a lot of obstacles from the time you identified a problem to the point where that problem was solved. Can you tell us maybe a few of the small barriers to entry that you faced?
Yes. First of all, you absolutely need to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will. And one of the greatest barriers, I think, in most people's minds about taking a good idea and actually getting a patent is that hurdle of, it's going to cost me money. I'm going to have to go hire an attorney. It's going to be very expensive, and so forth. And just as a technical matter, the patent office has adapted itself well to that, where for very little money, a first-time inventor can file a thing called a provisional patent application. And with that in hand, you're sufficiently protected that you could go get a benefactor. So let me say that. But on a general note, there is an old saw that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. That's crap. They'll beat you. There's a status quo. The status quo is very happy with how things are. They really don't need you coming in and disrupting things. And again, inventors are a disruptive lot. That's what we do. We upend the status quo. So there's a number of obstacles. The first is, honestly, you have to believe in yourself. And if you want to know what qualities it takes to actually be an inventor, you have to, first of all, somebody once said that a creative adult was a child that survived. You have to forget that stuff your mother and the teachers taught you about not coloring outside the lines. You absolutely want to color outside the lines. And you want to think outside the box, so you'll never get out of it. So that's the first thing. You have to give yourself permission. Secondly, you have to be sufficiently bright to come up with a new idea, something that has not existed in the world before. That requires a combination of intellect and imagination, and sometimes just seeing the opportunity that's right before you. Finally, and this is probably the most important of all, if you try something that doesn't work, have you failed? Well, if you stop right then and there, you have failed. But if you learn from what you've just done, move on to the successful product, then no, that's not failure. And the key difference is one word: perseverance. And I will assure you that anybody you talk to who's an inventor, especially a serial inventor, will say, at the end of the day, you need intellect, you need imagination, you need the opportunity, you need to be able to see with meaning, but perseverance is the key word.
Totally agree with you. And Sue, you mentioned some of the obstacles that you faced early on when you were bringing your idea to market. Any specific obstacle that was the most challenging, and how did you overcome it?
Well, there were a couple, but to lead with what Gary said, I had a great idea. I thought it was something that everybody wanted, you know, and the if you put it out there, the big needle companies will buy it right away, right? And I didn't realize everything involved. And so I came up with my first idea with a patent attorney that was one of my customers at CVS. So he gave me a good deal, and I was so proud. After 2 or 3 years of them turning me down, I finally got my first patent, and I met with a company, a big company that builds medical devices. I met with the founders, and we sat down, and they told me the problem is we can't build the mold. And that kind of crushed me. And I had to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. But I was introduced to the company down in Research Triangle area from one of the guys at this other company. And we brainstormed and came up with a working prototype. And I did things backwards. I came up with a working prototype. I spent the money as I was working and raising kids. I had a little bit of money that I'd save every year. And so it took a long time. But we came up with a working prototype, and I had to kind of be silent until I received that second patent, because I didn't want anybody to steal it. And again, as Gary said, you have to do a lot of research and make sure that nobody has anything similar. And actually, there's a guy back in 1985 that had something so similar. It was really, really scary. But luckily, I had an awesome attorney who kind of awarded things differently, and we came up, and they finally approved my second patent. The other obstacle, which was really hard for me, and it's hard for a lot of people, to speak in front of people. Public speaking is one of the scariest things in the whole world to do, and I was horrible at it. I remember showing up at a TEDCO prelude pitch, and I had everything written down, and I had somebody running the slides, and this guy shook his head, and he's like, "There's no way I would ever invest in you." But I didn't give up, and I continued to go, and I continued to work, and the third, and I took courses on how to speak and how to pronounce, and it took me a while, different tricks and tips that I kind of remembered along the way. So thank you, Ira, the storyteller. And the third thing was probably raising funds. That's still a work in progress, but we're getting there.
Well, perseverance, to Dr. Michelson's point, is critical in this whole journey as an inventor and an entrepreneur. And so when you've got that great idea, and now you want to try to monetize that idea, there's typically 2 paths you can pursue. One is you become an entrepreneur, you start a company around your idea, and you try to monetize your idea through selling that product. And an alternative path is to license or sell the intellectual property to someone else. Put it in the hands of an existing manufacturer or brand that already has distribution, that has manufacturing, and most importantly, has customers. And so, Grant, why don't we start with you? Because you kind of face this in both ways. You have products that are invented at Procter & Gamble and are commercialized. And then you also solicit ideas from outside through Connect and Develop. So can you talk about the 2 different paths?
Yeah, absolutely. In our core business in Procter & Gamble, when we do R&D, we typically control the market, and we file IP to protect our products and both the look and feel and functionality. So generally, we don't license out our technology, so it's more of licensing in. But there are cases where we use licensing to do some exploratory market work, where we want to understand, like, is this product or business something we want to invest more time in? On the receiving side, though, where I sit and Connect and Develop, often we have needs briefs that we post publicly. And as entrepreneurs, I would recommend individuals look at larger companies' websites on what they're soliciting for their needs. In many cases, you don't have to guess. It's very clear what they're looking for. But in that case, we get a bit of both. People offering up their inventions as solutions to our problems, or what they believe would be interesting to us. And in that case, you always want to have some kind of protection in place, either a filed patent or a granted patent. And we generally don't even have discussions with inventors unless they have this. And really, it's a protection for both us and the inventor. We try to hold these kind of values, strong in our principles and values towards the people we engage with. On the entrepreneur front, just a little bit of background there. It's based on what your business model is and what you believe you want to bring to market and how close you want to stay to it. If you believe that your passion is to be an inventor and not a business owner, that's something that you need to consider and know about yourself as you go look for investing and grow your product. In some cases, you can start off with a licensing idea, and if the answer is no, you need to manage it and bring it to life, then you kind of track along with your program or your invention. So that's kind of a high-level perspective of both kind of the corporate and entrepreneur standpoint.
That's a great overview. Thank you, Grant. Dr. Michelson, when you first came up with your inventions, you were practicing as a doctor, so becoming an entrepreneur and starting a business was probably not high on the list of things to do, especially after that 24 years of learning to become a doctor. What kind of influenced your decision?
Okay, I want to answer that question, but I'm going to have to back up one step. There's actually a third alternative between licensing the product, building your own company around it, and that's you. You're too modest. But what you do is, in my opinion, I've said this before, is incredible, because you're a one-stop shop for a first-time inventor who has no legs, has no wings, and you basically do all the steps, whether it's the prototyping, the filing the patent application. You know which companies are looking for that kind of product. You know how to monetize it. So you are the third alternative. I just want to put that out there because you left it out. So the other question, and before I answer, I'm going to interrupt myself again, only because both Grant and Sue said something but left the audience hanging. What if you have a great idea? You can actually go to the USPTO or to Google Patent and look up your idea. And it may turn out that somebody else already had the very same idea, or maybe they had a related idea. And a lot of times you can learn from what they were doing and say, hey, I know how to make this thing I was going to do even better now. So those are incredibly great resources. They cost you nothing. So you don't need a patent attorney to do that. All right, so now to answer Lewis's question, Lewis hit it right on the top of the nail, because I was a full-time surgeon, and I was actually, I think by necessity, inventing every day, because I actually did a spine fellowship. So for a year, I did nothing but spine surgery with somebody who was considered one of the master spine surgeons in the world. And when I would run into a problem, I'd say, his name was Alex. I'd say, Alex, what are we going to do? He'd go, oh, no, don't do anything with that, because I know so-and-so did this and the spinal cord got ruptured. Or I know somebody did this and it got wound up on his, and he would just say, no. And you have to understand, spine surgery is an extremely high risk endeavor. So people are very reluctant to deviate off that center line at all. And so when I would ask these people who are supposedly the best in the world what to do, their answer was always the same. No, don't do anything. So I didn't really like that answer too much. And that's what made all the difference. Now, you don't take risks inside of human beings that are alive, but you certainly can do whatever you want inside a cadaver or a model or whatever. And it was possible to create completely new operations that were far, far less invasive and more reliable than what we were doing. And that's what I did. But as a serial inventor, did I want to give up medicine and my passion, which was being a spine surgeon, to misquote Warren Buffett, if somebody wasn't paying me to do what I was doing, I'd have to find out who I could pay to let me. It was the greatest joy of my life doing what I was doing. So no, I wasn't going to give that up. So I had really no choice but to license it. And in reality, even if I had sold as much as I could have of any one of my products, it wasn't as much as, say, a 10% royalty on what the largest company in the world with a sales force of 60,000 people were going to sell. So for me, it was an easy decision. Now, on the other hand, there's companies like Gore-Tex, which are just one single product, spun polyfluorotether or ethylene, and it's a private company. So you can do it either way.
That's great advice. And Sue, how about yourself? Have you considered just licensing the intellectual property or really raising a lot of capital to start a company around it? What paths have you explored?
Well, when I came out with a great idea, of course, I contacted the big needle companies and said, hey, I'm here. I've got this great product. Do you want it? and of course, they say, no, 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 no. So it starts really unless you have a truly amazing idea that is a must-have versus a nice-to-have, you're not going to find anybody it's going to be really hard to license it right off the bat. So it starts with your discovery questionnaires. It starts with asking your peers and asking the people and having them try your product and having them try the other way and figuring out that it is something that people want. And then you have to establish your value proposition, which is why you're doing what you're doing. And then you come up with metrics to support it. And then once you have all that, you've got to build pitch decks and get yourself out there. It's very, very important to network. I wouldn't be where I was today had I not taken that first step out the door to go to my first SOAP meeting or my first Women in Bio meeting, which led to other things along the line. And so once you have that product and once you're at a point where you're kind of getting interest from the big needle companies, then you can decide, well, do I want to build a medical device company in the state of Maryland and do it myself, or do I want to license it or royalties? And I right now I can do either. I've got the interest of the big needle companies, and they are we're in conversations and they're supporting a lot of what Cartech's doing. So I probably will go that route eventually. That's my exit strategy, and everybody needs to have an exit strategy. But can I build a needle factory and do it myself? Absolutely. In the state of Maryland, I can. So it's all up in the air at this point.
Well, and sometimes you have to validate that there's demand for a product before you get the attention of a licensee. You got to prove that there's demand. You got to prove the market.
Absolutely. I probably conducted over 100 discovery questionnaires, over 50 user studies, and I-Corp interviews. I-Corp is an excellent, George Washington offers a free I-Corp class, and so does University of Maryland. And that way you get to speak with the thought leaders in the area and find out if this is something that is needed.
So we've touched a little bit on intellectual property. Specifically, we talked about patents, but we really haven't dug deep into that topic. And so let's pose this next question around IP. And that is, what is the importance of intellectual property in kind of moving forward when you create a product, and why obtain IP, or is there a case against it? Grant, you obviously as an inventor have filed for patents, and you see a lot of patented work that comes in through Connect and Develop. What is the philosophy of intellectual property at Procter & Gamble?
So the philosophy of intellectual property at Procter & Gamble, it's two things. One is you have utility patents that protect the functionality and kind of like the benefit mechanism you're getting from the invention. And then we have design patents that protect the look and feel of our products, and both are important. So, the distinctive look of a Tide bottle has a design patent around it. The Swiffer devices have design patents. And then we have functionality patents around our utility patents around the function of them. So it's important to have both in the strategy. And then another layer of complexity is different countries have different IP laws. So we end up filing patents in various countries. And I would say the easiest answer of which country you would want to file a patent in is really where you plan on selling your product or where competitor products lie that you're competing with. So it's very important, and it's also important enough that we have our own legal group in Procter & Gamble that that deals with the IP. So in terms of a strategy, it's working backwards from, we call it a wide moat in P&G, and you want to protect your patent in the broadest sense, so that, as we've discussed earlier, individuals or different companies trying to tiptoe around to create the better mousetrap. You protect against those situations and protect the business model around what proposition you're trying to go after. But at the end of the day, what's really important is the unmet consumer need that we're trying to address through the invention, and creating the patent strategy in a way where we protect the business model for many years to come. And you brought up an interesting question about where are the cases where you don't really want to file a patent. We tend to see that in manufacturing. So cases where it's really hard to enforce IP and we want to keep these things trade secret. So often that shows up in our manufacturing processes. Also, software is very difficult to patent, and there's people that have done patents around like the functionality of software, but sometimes software tends to be a more of a business model question, and keeping your code trade secret, the source code trade secret. So I would say high level, the strategy is products that can be reverse engineered or taken apart, or you can easily find the benefit around those require utility patents and the look and feel with design patents. Things that are hard to enforce, like manufacturing, those tend to be trade secret and kept very close to the chest. And even things like formulas, often formulas for specific fragrances or the chemistry of products, those that are hard to reverse engineer, those tend to be kept trade secret as well. And then in the world of software, we tend to play the strategy, or this is kind of the trend in market, where you spend less time worrying about the nature of the code, and you're looking at the benefit of the code in the system. So this device plus this code results in this outcome. That's generally the strategy and how you deal with things of that nature.
That's helpful, Grant. Thank you. And obviously for our audience, when we talk about intellectual property, we're skewing heavily towards patents in this discussion, but intellectual property also includes trademarks and trade dress. It includes copyright protection and trade secrets, to Grant's point. Trade secret, for a formulation or a manufacturing process, could be a very valuable form of intellectual property as well. And so, Dr. Michelson, you have filed quite a few patents. In fact, you're one of the most prolific inventors in the United States. Tell us about the role intellectual property has played in your pursuit as an inventor.
Okay, and just like before, I have a comment on something that Grant said. He spoke about unmet consumer need. And I just have to share this with the audience. I heard the gentleman talk who invented Dorito chips. There was no demand. He invented the chip before the demand got there, and then he had to have the audience catch up. I just thought that was a great story. Anyway, all of my experience in inventing is in the medical device industry. And I would say that is analogous to a venture capital model. In a venture capital model, you make modest investments in maybe 10 different things, hoping that one of them will see it to the end of the runway and have a sufficient payoff that you can recover the cost of the 9 that didn't, and now make a profit on the last one so you can stay in business. Without intellectual property, that falls apart. Because if there were no intellectual property to protect that one winner at the end, then a competitor who had no expenses, didn't fund any of the 10, would simply cherry pick that and produce it at a slightly lower cost and put you out of business. And then there would be no research and there'd be no development. So that's the context in which I worked. And so without intellectual property, that whole system would have collapsed. It was absolutely vital to medical invention, medical discovery, medical device development.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Michelson. And Sue, I know that getting your first patent was a very proud moment for you. What was kind of the importance? Why was getting a patent so critical for your invention and the strategy for bringing your product to market?
Well, I didn't want anybody to steal my idea. if you don't want anybody to steal your idea that you've worked so hard on and put all this money into, then it's important to get a patent and a second patent and a third. And now I've got 4 patents. And it took me years and years, but once you have that patent pending, then they can't steal it. So just getting it in there, what Gary said, you can file a patent very easily. I mean, I don't have the brains, I couldn't do it, but you can. But and the alternative is if you have a deeper mission and you don't care if somebody steals your idea and you just want to get it out there, and then a patent's not important. But you have to know that another company is going to have this invent around, and they're going to make a cheaper device than you can ever imagine, and they're going to be the ones that are going to make the money, and you have to live with that. So it was extremely important to me, and moving forward, you know, it's important once we start selling to Euro, and now I have a Canadian patent, and working with the Canadian government. So it just keeps going on and on.
That's great. Thank you, Sue. So we've got about 18 minutes left in this session. I've got plenty of questions that I could ask our panelists, but I would love to hear some questions from the audience as well. So if you just enter your questions for our panelists in the chat window, I'll have the chance to take a look at those and ask our panelists. And so I welcome everyone to pose a question if you have a specific one. If it's for any of our panelists or a specific panelist, please send those to me now. But while we're waiting on those questions, I've got another question that I want to ask. Obviously, innovation is what everyone talks about today, and our world is so much more innovative today than it was, say, 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I mean, there will be generations of kids who never remember a phone with a cord, you know, or a TV that, you know, weighed as much as, 100 pounds because it was so big. There's just such rapid innovation happening. And so what would you each say has led to kind of this surge in innovation, and what resources are available today that's making innovation so much easier for the average person to participate in? Grant, you want to go first?
Absolutely, and this is my opinion. So this is based on my observations, but I feel like in the last, call it 5 to 10 years, there's this huge surge of empowerment of individuals feeling like they can make a difference. And I think a lot of it happened from Shark Tank, the TV show. People saying that they can identify with the inventors up there and say, I can do that too. And, I think that it's a bit of that. And then there's this whole world that has emerged in the last 5 to 10 years also of, I'll call it this middle layer ecosystem between the inventors and the venture capitalists or the private equity firms, where you have accelerators, different types of education platforms for new emerging startups to educate them on the process, how to raise funding, how to protect their patents or protect their inventions with patents. And there's a ton of resources that have become available online. So I feel like individuals feeling that they can make a difference and are empowered with a lot of resources that make understanding the process much easier. And these individual ecosystem partners that you can have along the way really can drive innovation faster than it had before, and you can make fewer mistakes and learn from mentors such as Sue and Gary on what their experience was and how you can avoid some of the pitfalls but still learn along the way about how to be successful. So that's kind of my observation about what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years and this kind of growth in startups.
Great, thank you, Grant. Sue, what have you seen out there that is maybe attributed to the growth of innovation and independent inventors and entrepreneurs?
I kind of agree with what Grant said. When I first started my journey, I did not realize that I was an entrepreneur. I really didn't even realize it until about 2 years ago when I got into these accelerators and incubators and learned the business model canvas. So 10 years, 20 years ago, there wasn't such and there wasn't such an idea. There wasn't such, but right now and again, according to Shark Tank, it's an accepted, and they're now teaching entrepreneurship in colleges, and years ago they didn't have that, and they're teaching it in high schools too. So I think that's great, and it's opening up doors for people who have great ideas that have never really thought of pursuing them. So I didn't know that I was an entrepreneur, but now I do, and I wish, and so any advice I would give to somebody out there that has an idea is to apply for every single thing that you can apply for. Apply for grants, apply for accelerators, apply for incubators, especially now with Zoom. You can be in Y Combinator, which is huge over in the West Coast, and still be at your desk. So there's a lot more opportunity out there. And I know Baltimore's growing with Founder City, Baltimore, and other incubator accelerators all around the I think Springboard in DC. There's a number of them. So you just really have to kind of research, do a lot of research. Research for the rest of your life. That's
Thank you, Sue. And Dr. Michelson, what would you attribute to this surge in activity?
Well, I have nothing to add to them, but I'm just sitting here smiling, watching Sue, because it's so obvious how being an inventor transformed her as a human being. She's full of confidence. She's a great speaker now. It's a pleasure to watch it. I would say this though, I do think that the number of patent applications received by the USPTO is actually a proxy for how knowledge is expanding in the world. And what makes it interesting is it's a confirmation of what Lewis said. Not only are the number of applications increasing, they're actually increasing exponentially. And I think that one part of that is that there is now so much to know that nobody can know it all. And the slice of the pie that you can have expertise in is growing ever smaller and smaller. But your depth of expertise in that narrow sliver is getting greater and greater and greater. And I think that alone raises the potential for people within their work or their area of expertise to come up with new and great ideas.
I would agree with you. And I would probably add that, resources today for inventors are much more accessible and affordable, with 3D printing, with all of these online resources where you can get prototypes done at a really reasonable rate. Inventing is much more accessible today than it has ever been in our world's history. And so I think that leads to the surge of activity as well. And so when we think about inventors, we kind of think of the prototypical inventor. He's a white male, he wears a lab coat, and he works in the R&D department of a big medical or consumer product company or research institute. But that's changing. And so I would ask each of you, what is the importance of diversity today in the innovation ecosystem? I know, Dr. Michelson, you talked just briefly about that woman who now can be an engineer who never thought she could be an engineer 40 years ago. But Grant, why don't we start with you? How has diversity really taken root at the corporate level for innovation?
P&G definitely values diversity and in all aspects of P&G, especially in invention and entrepreneurship. We really believe that the breadth of diversity covering both economic, gender, race, technical expertise, and science, that really leads to unique solutions to unmet needs. And we really value those. And just a little bit of background. So my wife invented really our technology, Backseat Buddy. I brought her idea to life with some of my expertise and know-how, but she's a nurse and she was in the ER and she had an experience with a dad bringing in his child from a hot car seat incident. And she thought about it and she was thinking through the experience. What is the experience I would want to have as a parent and I want to have with an invention? And, that empowers everybody from a diversity standpoint to think through the lens of their experience and what they want their solution to be. And we really value that at the corporate level.
Well, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. And so it's always amazing, these great ideas that come from mothers who have to just get through the day, coming up with products that just make their life a little bit easier. Sue, obviously you are today's poster child of diversity in innovation, but how do we promote innovation to a more diverse segment of our population? How do we make it something that everybody, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, is behind?
Well, my board and my team is pretty diverse, so I just picked the best people for the job. I think the most important thing that I've learned through my journey, and I apologize for my dog, is culture, having a positive culture and having everybody's input and listening to what everybody says. Even though you might not think it's important at the time, down the line it might be important. So giving everybody a voice and allowing everybody to speak up and working for a common goal has allowed us to succeed to where we are today.
Thank you, Sue. And Dr. Michelson, we really have not touched on the amazing work that you do at the Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property, but can you talk about how that's been a catalyst to really improve and increase diversity in intellectual property?
Yes, and before I do that, though, I want to say this. I think that, if anything, should have been made obvious this last year, and this is just me personally, with Black Lives Matter and all these other things that are going on, is that most of us think we're not racist. And I honestly think that's not enough anymore. We have to do more than that. We have to be anti-racist. We have to reach down into impoverished communities that unfortunately predominantly belong to people of color and help these people get into better education early on, STEM programs early on. And this is girls too, but girls are doing better now. If you look at medical schools, usually half of the medical school class are now women. When I went to medical school, we didn't know what a woman was. So I think women are doing better, but not as well as they should be. But people of color, we really need to get into the communities much earlier on and bring these people into STEM programs so that they can succeed. In terms of the other question, when you ask a head of a university or a college, the chancellor, the provost, the president, what are you doing here? The answer is, we're training students for the future. Really. So when I look around, I see Facebook and Twitter and Google and Microsoft and Uber and Airbnb. All these companies were started by people in a college demographic. And guess what? 5 years ago, there wasn't a single college or university in the United States that had a course in intellectual property. So how are they training them for the future? This is 80% of the value of the Fortune 500 companies. It's intellectual property. So that's not training them. So we created the first undergraduate textbook called the Intangible Advantage. It's open license, freely downloadable. People can go get it right now at 20millionminds.org. And then we found out that the colleges said, well, that's not enough. Really? So then we created a college course in a box. We went out and found an outside patent attorney to teach the course. It was at USC. That was 5 years ago. Now it's in 300 universities and college. But what you're doing, Lewis, is even better, because what you're doing is you're incorporating the intellectual property component into the entrepreneurship program. And that's key. And we both know it. Having intellectual property protection, whether it's a patent or a copyright or a trademark, is actually the most important thing to getting funding for your entrepreneurial endeavor.
Well, I appreciate that, Gary. And I can thank you for the amazing work that the Michelson IP Institute has done, making this free curriculum available. If you haven't seen the videos and read through the materials that have been developed, I encourage everyone to go to their website, 20millionminds.org, and just watch the videos. If you want a quick lesson in intellectual property and what it is, that's where you're going to find it. And so the last question that I'm going to pose to each of you, because we're running out of time, is really comes down to what advice do you have for others that are kind of pursuing the same path that you have already taken? And so if you can leave our audience, if you can provide that inspiration or educational advice to the next generation, Grant, what would it be?
I would say, as an inventor, believe in what you're doing and have passion for the problem you're solving. Don't get frustrated if your first pass at the solution isn't exactly what it needed to be or works out. Like, always try to solve the problem and pivot as needed. As we've discussed today, really spend some time learning about IP, and honestly, learn a lot about how the business of startups work, like what a pitch deck looks like, what does a business proposal look like, a pro forma. These are things that investors will expect to see eventually. And as an inventor, you have to kind of wear multiple hats, and that's not a bad thing. It gives you a chance to learn more about other parts of a business, but definitely spend some time learning about the business and how you're going to make money, and how the investing aspect works. And then we've heard this a couple times from all of us, I think, but learn the art of the pitch. Like, if you believe in something, the passion will carry through, but spend time learning about how to pitch your idea and get traction with people, because often they're passing their gut check with you first as the individual, and it's really important to learn the art of the pitch to get past that first barrier.
Great. Thank you, Grant. Sue, what's that great piece of advice that you can leave with our audience this afternoon?
I guess I would quote Simon Sinek, and it's about the why. You have to be passionate about your why. You have to believe in what you're doing and have faith that you know that in the end, everything will work out. There's going to be high highs and there's going to be low lows, and accept it. Don't get too excited about the highs and don't get too down about the lows. You have to build something that's scalable, and you have to be coachable. That's really important. You have to have a good team and a platform and be able to pivot. And if you have all three of those, and you learn how to speak, and you practice that pitch over and over again, record it, look in the mirror, dream about it, and then you're there. So be passionate and don't ever give up.
That's great. Thank you, Sue. And Dr. Michelson, what is that one bit of advice you can leave with everyone?
Okay, before we do that, Louis, so we have to give some recognition to the Intellectual Property Owners Education Foundation, because they have some incredible videos. They gave out prizes for years to produce them, and I think the people who are listening would love to watch some of those, and they're just great. I have to say that. In regard to inventing, if you ask me the single most important thing, I'd say do it. You got to do it. You can't think about it. You can't go, oh, I thought about that, but no, you got to do it. And if the rubber doesn't hit the ground, no good. I had people walk up to me and go, oh, I thought of that. Really? I don't know if they did or they didn't, but what good does it do if all you did was thought about it? So my advice is do it.
Great advice from three very knowledgeable inventors. I want to thank Sue, Grant, Dr. Michelson for your time today. I hope that everyone really lets this information sink in. Thank you, Kristen, for organizing this, and the IPO Education Foundation for putting on this wonderful event. And we look forward to providing additional content. Please go to IPOEF.org to watch some of those videos that Dr. Michelson mentioned, our podcast where you can hear firsthand these wonderful stories about innovation that's happening in our country. And so thank you to everyone for all your work putting this on, and good evening.